Here we go again. You're on to another informative session on Armagate Radio Communications with Abiodun Abari, and the program is Dimensions in the Geopolitical Economy. As usual, we're here to give you insightful analysis on the happenings, the dimensions in the geopolitical economy, to assist you in making those well-informed, optimal choices as it concerns your organizations. This is in furtherance of the Armagate vision in enabling transformational leadership across the world. We are here for you to make you, your organizations, and the entire world positively transformed and continuously better. Welcome, everybody. Now, as we get into it, it promises to be an impactful ride. First, so much ado about USAID, the United States Humanitarian Agency, distributing billions of dollars in aid globally. And its covert use as a geopolitical tool of influence, a soft power agency meant to protect, promote, and advance United States interests and around the world. We have been able to look at the activities of the USAID, which has been recently DOGE. Yes, DOGE is the acronym for the Department of Government Efficiency, headed by world's richest man, Elon Musk, intended to bring efficiency to governance in the United States, cutting waste and ensuring that citizens get their dollars worth. Okay, so from the prism of purely humanitarian interventions, food, water, medicine, and shelter, war-torn zones, people are vulnerable, and so on, and all that positivity, and also from the prism of advancing imperial objectives, ranging from exerting direct influence, engendering direct influence, to cultural agenda, undermining governments and outright regime changes. Okay, so when we talk about this cultural agenda, you talk about the LGBTQ objectives. Trying to ensure that they are accepted worldwide, all right, even in conservative climes like Africa. How else will you justify spending money on Sesame Street show in Iraq? Okay, or talking about strengthening trans-led organizations to deliver gender-affirming care. All right, so you look at those expenses and understand that yes, this is an agenda that goes beyond humanitarian aid, but it actually involves the cultural transformation of the world. Talking about the acceptance of the transgender community. Okay, or to globalist agenda like telling Vietnam to stop burning trash and spending $6.7 million to protect biodiversity from wildlife crimes in southern Africa, and so on. So we'll be able to look at these issues and be able to do justice, so to speak, to them, and have a proper perspective of the USAID, the pros and the cons, about the implications for developmental states, even if they're not getting the direct aid. Does it give them the ample opportunity to be able to create their own path to greatness, to fulfill the ambitions? Okay, does it remove any kind of impediment from their necks and allow them to make their own choices rather than pander to the whims and caprices of the imperial masters? Because I have always said one of the consequences of having the Donald Trump presidency, that's having the nationalist populists in the White House, will mean that United States imperial activities will be sort of rolled back, right? Because the emphasis is on America first, okay? And America first as a policy has its own opportunity costs, in that there will be alternatives forgone in trying to pursue global objectives. So of course I talk about another implication of winning elections and the USAID getting dodged, like I said, all right? And you look at the implications of DEI, and the approval for Trump's activities so far from the U.S. Citizens is in the 80th percentile. All right, so voters voted for this agenda. They're getting what they want, and they are satisfied with what they want so far. So Doge is targeting $2 trillion in cuts, trying to eliminate waste goes to workers. And even last week, they were given a question. Federal workers were asked, "What did you do last week?" 5 bullet points. What did you do last week? And that's in this. Sprouted a whole new controversy, but I don't see anything wrong with that. If you're actually working, be able to come up with what you've done in the last week with 5 bullet points in under 10 minutes. That's what I think. If you've actually been working, so and you cannot blame the voters for wanting waste to be cut with $36 trillion in debts and counting. Okay. So, targeting $2 trillion cuts is not a bad idea. All right, so now we look at the clash of philosophies. We look at the clash of government ideologies. Small government versus big government. All right, so when you talk about big government, of course, you want to talk about progressivism. All right, you talk about socialism, and you also talk extremely about communism. All right, so government intervention, big government being involved in a big way, yes, might be positive for citizens in the short run, because if government is able to intervene, maybe from shelter to healthcare to and social amenities that affect the people directly, it's somehow positive. All right, and but at what cost? Is government being able to afford it? If government is not being able to afford it, all right, despite how ambitious, despite how benevolent, despite how good-natured the government is, there will be deficits. All right, that means the spending, the ambition surpasses the revenue. Okay, the reality. All right, so deficits. And when deficits occur, the government might either resort to debts or printing of money, which of course we enjoy that inflation. All right, these have been proven time and time again. All right, as against having a small government, creating the atmosphere, the environment for private sector to thrive, and putting more and more resources, more and more factors of production into private hands, and government getting smaller and smaller, and regulations being reduced, red tape being cut, and you will try to have that split screen of the small government and big government, and see, okay, which one is better. All right, and like I always say, okay, for the short run, yes, you might say good government is better, but what about the impact on debt, the impact on inflation? So even the citizen's life, the quality of life will be eroded with inflation, because you're doing less with more money. Even when wages go up, even if people are able to do more jobs, you find that real wages are dropping because of inflation. All right, so those are issues that are important to consider in the geopolitical economy. Look at those in the interplay of those choices. So today we want to understand the seismic shift in the foreign policy of the United States. Okay, we all saw this coming, so it's not really a surprise, and it is actually what the United States citizens have voted for. Okay, so we take a deep dive into Vice President Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference. All right, and I must admit that he was prepared for the kind of response his speech will receive. That's among the European elite, political elite, when he was given a round of applause when he sympathized with the victims of the Munich disaster, where an asylum seeker was mounted. The police rammed his vehicle into a crowd, causing grief. Okay, and he was given an applause, and he actually said that he hopes that that will not be the last applause we'll be getting in the speech. And with the hindsight now, no wonder he had that skepticism. So in doing this, let's just quickly lay a background. We are all too familiar with, as listeners, to my program. Yes, this is because ordinarily talking in Europe, a US leader talking in Europe at the security conference is expected to really talk about Russia, the Ukraine war, and China, the threats posed by these countries, and so on and so forth. All right, so let's just lay a brief foundation and see what really happens. All right, about 11 years ago, we recall the Maidan Revolution, right, which was actually a coup orchestrated by the West. We understand that, yes, Victoria Nuland, the extra State Department official, was on the ground then. Okay, and you had CIA and other intelligence agencies on the ground. All right, so we had funded protests to the tune of about $1 million daily from the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. All right, so the protests were growing, and even the CIA-backed protesters burnt members of the Ukrainian government alive, in Odessa and in Mariupol. These were egregious actions undertaken by the protesters. Of course, they did not receive any condemnation from the United States and its allies. And within months, you had the democratically elected and Russian-leaning presidents, the person of Viktor Yanukovych. Yes, Viktor Yanukovych, who was overthrown, and a puppet government was installed by the West. And pronto, Crimea voted in a referendum to secede and return to Russia after 55 years. Yes, recall that it was the Ukrainian Nikita Khrushchev, the then leader of the Soviet Union, that gave Crimea to Ukraine. Okay, so and the vote there was closely monitored by the United Nations election observers, but the West cried foul and referred to Crimea as occupied by Russia, even to this day. All right. So, and you had other regions like Luhansk and Donetsk, looking at what Crimea has done, because Luhansk and Donetsk are also dominated by ethnic Russians. All right. So, and they also decided to leave after seeing that Crimea left, and of course, Kiev reacted violently, firing artillery and mortars at the civilian population. And when those kind of things happen, you know that militias are not so farther by. They before you know it, militias are formed, and when they are formed, and you have a conflict erupting, and a full-blown conflict erupting. So conflict erupted with militias emanating from the war-torn regions, with, of course, bloody consequences, and entered the Minsk agreement, that was backed by the United Nations Security Council, and was brokered after 19 hours of negotiations by President Poroshenko of Ukraine, representing Ukraine, of course, and representatives from Luhansk and Donetsk, the regions wanting away, and President Francois Hollande of France, and Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany, as well as Russia's President Vladimir Putin. And of course, the Minsk agreement, which also involved allowing the ethnic Russians to be able to speak their language, okay? Because at that time, one of the points of conflict or disagreement was actually Ukraine suppressing the Russian language, among ethnic Russians in Ukraine. So the Minsk agreement was signed, all right, and it was backed by the United Nations Security Council. But actually, the West and Ukraine, by extension, paid lip service, because the agreement was not implemented at all by Ukraine. Ukraine did not honor the Minsk agreement, and that was a basis for Russia's provocation. I mean, the people of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions were still being shelled by government forces, and of course, the comments by former Chancellor Angela Merkel saying that the Minsk agreement was just a ploy to buy time, I mean, for Ukraine to be able to arm itself. All right, so it was just some sort of kicking the can down the road moment. So there was no sincerity about, I mean, from the West and its allies and Ukraine, I mean, concerning the Minsk agreement. So, and then that really justifies the provocation that Russia felt, and actually, I mean, the justification that it's advancing for its invasion of Ukraine. That the Minsk agreement, despite being backed by the United Nations Security Council, despite being come about, I mean, agreed, I mean, after 19 gruesome hours of negotiation, I mean, was just something, some sort of a ploy to buy time for Ukraine, for it to arm itself. Okay, so with that background, now let's look at Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference, because that actually sets the tone for the Trump's foreign policy. So the Trump's administration believes in reasonable settlements between Russia and Ukraine, and with the activities of the envoys. First, the envoy to the Middle East, who is intervening in the Israel-Hamas debacle, in the person of Steve Witkoff, who has made tremendous progress in the Middle East. He had to also go to Saudi Arabia to get involved with the meeting with the representatives of Russia, okay, in Saudi Arabia, in furtherance of the settlement of the Russia-Ukraine war, okay, and reckon that Keith Kellogg, Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, the special envoy to Ukraine, actually met with Zelensky about 4 or 5 days ago, right after the back and forth concerning the rare earth metals, which we'll get to soon, right? So we look at him telling Europe to step up to provide for its own defense, okay? And this is not surprising. There's something that we understand that is Trump's position, that there should be no free lunch, that the United States cannot cry more than the bereaved, and they will only support to the extent that Europe is willing to invest in its own security. So actually, we have a shift from the usual mouthing or rhetoric of the threats Russia and China pose to Europe, and okay, and I mean, as in terms of external actors, right? And that shift is to a threat from within. All right, so J.D. Vance, Vice President J.D. Vance, talked about the threat from within, that's the retreat of Europe from its fundamental values, the shared values with the United States, right? So basically talking about values of free speech, which I agree to, that is under threat in Europe, all right? So he reckoned that a former European commissioner on TV was happy that the Romanian government had just annulled presidential elections, warning that if the outcomes are unexpected, there could be an encore in Germany. And I think right after that shows himself as lost elections and considered defeat. So I don't think German elections will be cancelled. So of course that's an antithesis to the shared democratic values with the US. All right. So you talk about the high moral standing of defense of democracy. All right. The rhetoric used to justify the policy of the West in Ukraine, and also used to justify digital censorship. All right, you reckon that when Biden administration, in conjunction with Europe's leaders, pledge support for Ukraine for as long as it takes, recall that phrase, as long as it takes. It was actually in defense of democracy. Okay, that was the justification that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is an affront on democracy, and when justifying digital censorship, right? So it's also the defense of democracy, that democracy is not undermined, that is usually mouthed, that is usually the usual rhetoric, all right? So if that is the usual rhetoric, Vance's argument is that where is that high moral ground of defense of democracy when it comes to Romanian elections, when it comes to Romanian the presidential elections, where voters had already spoken? Okay, so European courts cancelling elections and high-ranking officials threatening to cancel others with unwanted outcomes do not show some sort of defense of democracy. Yes, we also talk about living democratic values. Very important, not just rhetoric. Okay, so, and he referred to the Cold War, and the Cold War as being as something that was between the defenders of democracy and tyrannical forces on the continent. Okay, so you ask that, okay, which side of the Cold War divide censored distance? Which side closed churches? Which side cancelled elections? Okay, and he believed that the Soviet Union lost the Cold War, and because they were against the universal values of liberty, freedom of choice, and mischoice, and invention and building. Okay, so can we actually mandate innovation or creativity, or force people, I mean, what to think, what to feel, or what to believe? You know, so alright, so but his fear now is that the Cold War winners do not reflect the values that earned them that victory today. Okay, that those values are being eroded. They are being eroded. Okay, so you look at Brussels, which of course is one of the Cold War winners, alright, seeking to shut down social media in the face of civil unrest for hateful content. Alright, so who decides what? Who are the gatekeepers? Who decides what is misinformation? Who decides what is hateful? Who decides what is hate speech? Alright, and in Germany, alright, talking about instances where these values are being eroded. Okay, police arresting citizens on the suspicion of posting anti-feminist comments under the guise of combating misogyny on the internet. Alright, and of course you had Sweden, where the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Quran burning after the ally was shot. I don't support Quran burning anyway, and I believe that that should be a threading of the needle as it concerns the sensitive nature of the incident. So, and you have in the United Kingdom some sort of a backslide from conscience rights, you know, placing religious liberty at peril or in the crosshairs. All right, so for instance, the 51-year-old physiotherapist and army veteran Adams McConnell, who was standing 50 meters from an abortion facility and silently praying for 3 minutes. He was not obstructing anyone, he was not interacting with anyone, he was just silently praying on his own. And so when British law enforcement accosted him to know what he was praying for, he replied it was on behalf of the unborn son his former girlfriend had aborted years before. And he was found guilty of breaking the government's buffer zone law, which prevents prayers or any action within 200 meters of an abortion facility that could influence someone's decision to have an abortion. For me, as an African, that is somehow outrageous. And what say you? And last October, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within the so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayers within their homes may amount to breaking the law. You know, and people were really urged to report citizens suspected of breaking the law. You know, people being encouraged to inform on citizens who were we're not keeping that law. So it now appears that the practice of free speech in Europe amounts to breaking the law. So is free speech in retreat in Europe? You also recall the arrest and detention of Telegram's founder, Pavel Durov, in France last year. Okay, and the Biden administration, the preceding United States government, pressured social media companies to censor misinformation. So recall the Twitter files, when Elon Musk bought Twitter, he actually exposed all those information, and the testimonies by Mark Taibbi before Congress, okay, and even Mark Zuckerberg, the owner of Meta, all right, although claiming that they took a different path, from the path that Twitter used, but you find that is still the same outcomes of censoring speech, okay? And recall that even during the coronavirus, any suggestion that it came from the Wuhan lab, that came from a leak from the Wuhan lab in China, was censored and termed misinformation. But with benefit of hindsight now, we know that it's not misinformation, and that is true. Okay, so Vance promised that under Trump's leadership, that people with opposing views will still be allowed the platforms to air them. Alright, that they will fight to defend the right to offer them in the public square, even if they don't agree with those views. So Romania cancelled presidential elections in December under pressure from continental neighbors and intelligence agency that Russia propaganda had affected Romanian elections. All right, so I know you might say, okay, Russia buying social media ad spaces might be unethical, but if a democracy can be undermined by a few hundred thousands of dollars of digital ad spending, by a foreign country, then can we say that democracy was well grounded in the first place? Legitimate question to ask, valid question to ask. So allowing citizens to speak their minds will make them stronger. All right, and even the organizers of the Munich Security Conference banned lawmakers representing populist parties from both sides of the aisle from participating in the conversations. All right, so when political leaders represent a constituency, all right, even if we don't agree with them, it is important to have a dialogue with them, tolerate different opinions, different voting choices, even unwanted victory. Okay, Europe must step up its defense spending and get more involved in the security of the continent. Talking about burden sharing, all right. So the United States can focus on other parts of the world that are in danger. All right. So we talk about the positive vision that animates the shared important and crucial security pact. All right. So there's no security, all right, if you're afraid of voices, of opinions, and the conscience that guide the people. So the belief is that the crisis that Europe is in today is self-inflicting. All right, that if you run in fear of your voters, all right, there is nothing the United States can do. All right, more can be achieved from the democratic mandates, all right, rather than a thin mandate. The democratic mandate that emanates by being more responsive to the voice of the citizens. All right, we talk about objectives of having competitive economies, of having affordable energy, low-cost energy, of securing supply chains. All right, so and to do that, you need democratic mandates, which cannot be won by censoring your opponents or jailing them, or voices must be heard. All right, that's why the issues of mass migration cannot be ignored. It's a big issue today in Europe, it's a big issue today in the United States, and today 1 in 5 people living in Germany moved from abroad. The same thing in the United States, and that is an all-time high. All right, and movement from non-EU countries to the EU doubled from 2021 to 2022. All right, so consequences of deliberate actions by political leaders of the continent and elsewhere over a decade. So this migration crisis is a consequence of deliberate actions of political leaders of the continent and of course in the United States in the past decade. Okay, and referencing the attack in Munich, where the asylum seeker was already known to law enforcement, actually rammed his car into a crowd, shadowing communities. All right, and you hear and see incidents like that happening time and time again. So it is clear voters did not approach the ballot box to open the floodgate to millions of unwanted, unvetted, illegal immigrants. Voters are endorsing all over Europe, leaders who can end the illegal migration, and that was what happened in the US, with voters overwhelmingly voting the Trump administration in, because they were actually tired of the effects of illegal migration. Right, so they're tired of being shuffled about, tired of being relentlessly ignored by leaders. So whatever issues that exist should be adjudicated by democracy at the ballot box, not opposition stifling, not opinion censoring, and so on. So with all those actions, nothing is protected, I assure you. All right, and those actions can even undermine and ultimately destroy democracy. So speaking up and protecting democracy is not election interference. All right. So when citizens express their feelings or their opinions, aspirations, millions of voters expressing their feelings, those feelings, those opinions, those aspirations should not be described as invalid or unworthy. Okay, voters have their own wisdom. Right? There should be no room for firewalls. The voice of people matters. All right, uphold it or not. Right? People should have a voice, and leaders, should actually endorse the choice. So no need to be afraid of the future. Embrace what the people say, even if it's surprising, and you can face the future without fear, knowing that the people stand with you. Okay, and that is the great joy of democracy. Not about the buildings or institutions, but democracy is the way, is the very belief that our citizens have wisdom and they have a voice, and a refusal to listen will render even the biggest successes very, very ephemeral. And with that, we've come to the end of today's episode. I want to assure you that next time around we'll be looking at Trump's peace plan in Europe, that's concerning the Russia-Ukraine war. What is Trump's peace plan? Talking about no US boots on the ground, European peacekeeping force, neutrality for Ukraine, no NATO membership, and the real earth deal. Okay, the back and forth and so on. So we'll be doing justice to all of that next week. So just keep it the date, right? And please do remember that at Amogate, we are always ready to help and support organizations to work optimally, creating frameworks and processes for optimization of resources and attainment of goals. You can contact us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram at Amogate. You can also visit our website at www.theamogate.org. Our email is contact@theamogate.org. In closing, I want to leave you with the words of late Pope John Paul II, a veritable champion of democracy. Quoting says, "Do not be afraid." End of quote. I hope that I have been impactful, and I hope that you join me next time. Until I come up again on your devices, it's bye for now. Thank you, and God bless you.